Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream to discuss things related to digital transformation. Every week, we do this weekly live stream, same time, same place, streaming to all the platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as Instagram. So thank you for being here today. Today's topic is AI and change management for manufacturing companies, which is a super fun topic, and I'm excited for the conversation. I'm going to introduce our guest here in just a moment, who's going to help us dive into this topic here in just a moment. But before I introduce our guest here today, just a couple of logistical things. First of all, this live interview is part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast. So it's a weekly podcast we publish. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see all the past episodes of the show that we've done. The reason I say that is because this interview will become part of that podcast. We add some more content to it. We edit it, polish it up, and becomes part of the podcast. So by being here today, you are being part of our live production of that podcast. So thank you for being here today. Again, that podcast is called Transformation Ground Control at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And that podcast is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. And my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And real quickly, before I introduce our guest, I also wanted to note that I have some questions for our guest here today about AI change management in manufacturing. But ideally, I'd love to hear what the audience has to ask and say about this topic here today. So be sure to chime in at any point along the way. You can hit the chat, just drop in the chat any questions or comments you might have. We're keeping an eye on the chat across all the platforms. So wherever you're listening or watching, we can get to those here today. And speaking of the chat, if you don't mind just dropping the chat what city and country you're joining from today. We always love to hear where our global audience is joining from today. So drop in the chat if you don't mind what city and country you're in. I'm in Denver, Colorado today. Finally, after being delayed because of the CrowdStrike debacle last week, I'm finally back in Denver as of last night. So that's where I'm from. I'll let my guest tell you where she's from here in just a moment, but drop in the chat where you're from if you don't mind. And then having said all that, I'm excited to introduce our guest. Again, the topic is AI and change management for manufacturing companies. And joining me is Kate Arndt, who's the Senior Manager for Technology Strategy and Innovation at Amgen. So Kate, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Excited to have you. It's your first time on this show. First time you and I have had a chance to have a formal interview like this. So I appreciate you being here today. Before we jump in and just start diving into the topic at hand here, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Amgen.
Sure. So at Amgen, we are working really hard to prioritize implementing various technologies kind of across the organization. But my role at Amgen is to kind of focus on the manufacturing side of things and working with our alliance partners to integrate these new technologies into manufacturing in the most effective and beneficial way possible.
Great. Now you've been in the technology space for some time now. How did you end up in this space, and how did you sort of grow up and get to this role where you're at right now?
So I have a little bit of a, I guess, varied career. I studied industrial and manufacturing engineering in college, and then I went to ExxonMobil and basically sold industrial and automotive lubricants and greases. So that was a lot of exposure in the industrial space. I spent so much time, my whole career, in manufacturing, seeing it from different lenses. And I've always been obsessed with data, though, and I realized there's such an opportunity for manufacturers if they were to be able to access their data and use it. It would really revolutionize their entire production and optimize, their businesses. So that's when I kind of decided to make the change and go into tech. And I basically found a computer vision AI startup that focused specifically on manufacturing use cases. And that was my break into technology about, I want to say, almost 4 years ago. So it's kind of crazy that it has been so long. And then it's kind of just blossomed from there. It's been super fun, and basically ended up at Amgen because I feel like the experiences I had at the startups really gave me a lot of exposure to a very diverse range of needs in manufacturing. And I've seen, the experts who have done a really good job in implementing AI. Different companies do that firsthand. I've also seen what doesn't work. So I'm really excited to bring, some of those lessons to Amgen and, do my best to help them out in any way.
That's cool. So it sounds like you sort of led your career with more of the business side, and then you added the technology layer a little bit later on, or a little bit more recently. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. So I think that I was always a technical and business blend, I guess I'd say. And ironically, in a sales role, which has been my past, I've always been very interested in the tech side of things. So,
Yeah.
But so I've come to this position now that to be honest, I'm excited not to be in sales for a little bit.
Yeah.
It'll be nice to be on the other side of things.
Yeah, and do real work instead of just kidding to all the salespeople that might be listening right now.
Yes.
Well, speaking of the audience here today, I want to just real quickly acknowledge, while we're doing introductions here, quickly acknowledge where everyone's joining from today. We have someone, I don't see the name, but on LinkedIn from Monterrey, Mexico. Darian's joining from Denver. Even joining from Croatia. Saif, Saif didn't say where he's from, but hi Saif. Vipin from Boston. Sam Graham from Spain. Welcome back, Sam. I haven't seen you in a few weeks. Saif from Pakistan. Jonathan from Greenville, South Carolina, kind of close to where you are right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And Craig from Hereford, UK. Babek from Iran. So thank you. Just a few examples of where people are joining from today. Thanks for being here. Appreciate that. And again, if you have questions as we get started here, I'd love to hear your comments and questions here in the chat. So I guess as we get started in this conversation, Kate, how would you summarize how AI and manufacturing has evolved, where we stand here today in mid 2024?
Yeah, so it's funny. I mentioned I've loved technology and data, but when I went to school, which feels like forever ago now, and when it comes to AI and technology, it kind of is forever ago now. Essentially, leveraging data meant getting information from a machine in hindsight, and then being able to run analyses from historic data. And that was pretty complex, a little bit clunky, and it didn't really provide real-time information. So you're always going back retroactively to kind of solve your problems. I think that what AI has done and how it's helped manufacturers evolve who've been able to utilize it is allowed them to see things in real time, and in some cases even be more predictive and getting ahead of things in what might come out of the historic data, and being able to predict what could come down the line. No pun intended in the production process. And how AI has evolved specifically, I think that there's a lot. What I've realized is that it does help when there are AI companies that specialize in manufacturing, because it is such a complicated space to implement such complex technology. So I guess that's what I would say is I think that the domain expertise and the specialization of AI companies, or portions of an AI company specializing in manufacturing, has really helped AI evolve. And especially like these companies now understand use cases and can kind of repeat their successes and grow their products in a way that's more geared towards the needs of a dynamic environment like manufacturing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like AI is having a big impact on all kinds of industries, not just manufacturing, but I do think that manufacturing has sort of a unique opportunity to make even better use of AI than any other organization, largely because, like you said, the complexity of manufacturing organizations sort of lends itself to potential AI value. And also the data, you talked about the data a moment ago. When you look at all the data that a manufacturer captures, from the shop floor to the back office to the supply chain to the customer side, I mean, there's just so many data points that if you could figure out how to use AI to make better use of it, I feel like it's really ripe for high business value there.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I know it's a big thing, and I know that, manufacturers are starting to figure out like how to use AI. And I think a lot of them are struggling with it, sort of how you alluded to that. But what do you think will happen, as you look to like the rest of this year into 2025? If you had to predict the future, which I know you can't, neither can I, but if you kind of look at where we're headed, how do you think manufacturers will start to adapt? I know you talked about AI providers being a little bit more specialized for the needs of manufacturers, but how could manufacturers themselves, do you think, or how do you think they will start to adapt and maybe start to get some momentum behind some of their AI initiatives?
Well, I think the pressure of right now, I think we're at like the cusp of seeing the early users of AI and early adapters of AI. They're going to start to, really break away from the other later to the game manufacturers. I think that there's going to be a very clear distinction between, manufacturers that have leveraged their data in a competitive advantage way. And I think that that's going to provide a little bit of urgency to manufacturers who haven't really committed and been able to follow through with implementing data-driven technology in their production. And I think that what's maybe holding them back more than the technology is the challenges that come with, people and the organization and changing the way manufacturing operates as a whole. We went from pretty siloed roles and responsibilities, like maintenance was maintenance, operations is operations, and that's not, and then business is business, IT is IT. And then when it comes to implementing AI, you need a much more holistic approach. So if the manufacturers that are lagging a little bit behind, I think that what they'll need to do is get really serious about really intentional about their commitment to implementing these technologies.
Yeah. Do you think manufacturers are going to know, even if they are committed to it, like they say, okay, yeah, we're committed to AI, we're going to double down on it, we're going to invest heavily in it. Are you seeing that they know how to get started, or do you see them struggling with where do we begin? Because I feel like you said, it's such a big, complex animal, the whole manufacturing space, it can be overwhelming.
I think that's their biggest challenge is, it's so large in scope, and the leaders know they want to implement AI, but they're like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And then they're also struggling because there's so many vendors out there that are trying to sell them solutions that, may or may not fit their needs. And it's such a large scope. I think it can be a little bit overwhelming, and it's easy to make the wrong decisions. So I do think that that's something they struggle with. And it's like the paradox of choice. If you have too many choices, you're going to take forever to make one. And a lot of manufacturers want to make sure they have everything perfect before they start to implement technology solutions. And that can hold them back a little bit too, because the longer they're waiting to get their foundational platform perfect, the more technology is evolving and the more they're missing out. So even if they get it perfect in 2 years, AI solutions are going to be much different in 2 years. So yeah. I hope that answers your question. I kind of went a little bit.
No, it does. It's great. And actually, it leads to a follow-up here. This is actually, and I was thinking this exact same thing because, of course, great minds think alike. And Sam Graham is a regular on this show, and he asked, what foundations do companies need to have before putting AI in place? And that was actually the follow-up I was going to ask you too. When you think about the foundation that a manufacturer needs, what do you mean by that?
Sure. Sorry. What I mean by that is manufacturers have all this equipment, right? That's producing data, whether or not they're extracting it and contextualizing it. There's a lot of data that's kind of just hanging around waiting to be used. The foundation that a lot of manufacturers want to put in place is like, especially let's say they have multiple facilities, they want all of their facilities with the exact same tech stack, each of them having, the same historian, the same data lakes and the same technologies. But the challenge is there is they have to evaluate their current tech stack, then eliminate some and then reintroduce some. So it's really, they're trying to create a very consistent standard across their organization. And while I can understand that and appreciate it for like certain pieces of their tech stack, I do think that is a barrier to them implementing more advanced technology sooner. And the foundation, though, I'd say if you want to implement AI, collecting the data from your equipment is like the baseline, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think you need to do it across your whole facility to get value right away. If you came up with like a use case, thinking, okay, this one line has a bottleneck that I'm sure about. I think it's with the pump. Maybe something's not flowing right. Maybe you want to evaluate one line against 3 others. Focus on collecting the relevant data to that use case. See if it helps solve your problem. Leverage AI for that data specifically, and then you can scale it versus making sure you have all the data for all the lines and then applying the AI. I think that is another thing that they could kind of expedite the process a little bit more.
Yeah. And if they could find like even if they're little tiny little use cases, if you could find some like pockets of innovation where you're trying out innovation for a little part of your business or a little part of your process, and then once you sort of fine tune it, then you can start to scale it, across the organization. It seems like that, more of an agile type of approach could be a way to do it rather than trying to take that traditional approach that you might take like with a big ERP system. You're going to, a lot of times take more of a waterfall approach where you try to define all your requirements up front and try to define your end-to-end business processes and then implement the technology. I don't think that's really how AI is going to add value. And I think the technology is changing so fast, it's just going to become outdated by the time you deploy it if you take that sort of slower approach there.
Exactly. And for the manufacturers that, are very committed to that approach, I say, fine, go that route. But at the same time, there's opportunity that you can do that. If you cherry pick use cases, you'll get a lot of value there and might as well start implementing that in parallel, even if you are working on just the foundational part. But computer vision is a really good example as like, you don't need a big foundation. If you want to understand, maybe you're doing a quality check, leveraging like computer vision, you need, the hardware, and then you need, essentially you're going to be operating on the edge if you want real-time information. So there's some connectivity that's involved, and then whatever analytics platform you're using on top of that or AI platform on top of that. So the data is a very specific set of information, but it doesn't require that much foundational technology besides, what's specifically involved in that application.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes total sense. Here's a comment from Saif. It's sort of a follow-up comment or a response to Sam's question about what foundational stuff needs to be in place. But Saif has, first of all, plant and machinery need to be equipped with PLC. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Does that mean anything to you, Kate, or do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's one of those things, like in the situation where, if it's a computer vision application in that very specific use case, I'm not really sure how relevant a PLC specifically is. But yeah, if you want to, at the last company I was at, if you wanted to build a digital twin, basically you needed a historian where your data was going. So we could use that historic data in order to build that digital twin. So different industry 4.0 technologies, if you will require different foundation. I'm just saying that there are use cases in AI that don't require as much. However, I will say, if you're not like the bare minimum is you need to be collecting data. It needs to be going somewhere, whether it's a data lake or on-prem, whether it's, a public cloud or that's pretty much a bare minimum requirement. But other than that, if you have the data going somewhere, that's the foundation, I guess, for AI.
Yeah. Now, what about the initial early signs of the impact that AI is having on sort of the human side? And that's part of what we want to talk about here today too, is the change management piece of it. I know so far we've been talking about how we can get our heads around how to use AI or how to build some of these use cases, get the foundation in place to be able to start to deploy AI, maybe even on just a limited scale. But from what limited usage of AI that most manufacturers are seeing right now, what sorts of impacts are you seeing to the human side of the equation, or how do you think AI will impact people, longer term?
So how AI will impact so my favorite thing about it, I'll start with the positives, I guess, is safety is a really great use case, or it's a really beneficial impact of AI on humans in manufacturing settings. So where in the past you might have to go inspect something that's in a dangerous area, maybe it's very hot, or it's like, you have to kind of crawl through some sketchy crevices that might be dangerous. Now you can leverage, robotics and computer vision to go and make assessments, in basically replacing the human when it comes to the physical evaluation, and also making the work environment safer. Because if you're evaluating or trying to understand how your equipment is just from a safety perspective, if you're able to do that more consistently and find trends in your data, then you're more likely to be able to prevent incidences from occurring, just like you would optimize your production. So from a human impact, I think safety is one of the best things that are going to be coming from this. Also with ergonomics, being able to automate tasks that were ergonomically unhealthy for humans, I think that will be beneficial as well. And then empowering like operators who are hands-on. A lot of times they might not know exactly what to do if something's going wrong. It might be like a gut check. So empowering operators with like specific information in real time, I think is, just another aid and another tool. I will say it's important to think about the actual technology that's communicating to the operators. There's an example that someone gave that they invested a lot of money in really heavy tablets. And so their entire manufacturing facility, they all got these really heavy tablets. And they didn't really talk to the operators about it to get their input before they made the purchases. And no one was using them. And they were like, well, why aren't you using them? And they got that information, that feedback. So I think it's really important on both sides, like getting the human feedback and really incorporating everybody who is working in manufacturing settings, incorporating them in the solutions so that it does provide value to them and make their lives easier, as I would assume the intention is for most companies.
Yeah, and it's sort of you're sort of answering this question. I'll pop it up anyway, even though I think you just sort of alluded to it or answered it. But this is from someone on LinkedIn. I don't see the name. I apologize, but it says, "What are the critical challenges in implementing AI in manufacturing, and how can change management practices address these challenges to ensure a smooth transition?" And sort of you give a good example there of what happens when you don't do good change management with the tablets and people weren't using them. Is there any other advice you'd have for companies as they think about just change management strategies that might be helpful for them?
Sure. So many stakeholders. That's one of the biggest things I'll say on both sides of the spectrum, whether I'm selling technology to a manufacturer or I'm a manufacturer and I'm trying to implement technology. I kind of mentioned this before, but in the past, manufacturing pieces of the organization in manufacturing all had their own scorecard, so to speak. They had their own goals. And if you want to implement AI effectively, then you need input from every single, I guess, silo in order to make it effective from a business perspective. And starting with the business value, I think that's the other thing that manufacturers kind of are a little disconnected about sometimes, because maybe it's the technology group, like I'm part of the technology group, but if we're not thinking about the business value of implementing technology in our manufacturing facilities, then we're not aligned with our overall goals. And that can lead to digital debt, another buzzword I hear, but you're making these massive investments. And if you don't have that alignment from manufacturing and the business side of things, then, and you don't start with like a lot of intention and a use case, then it could lead to that. And I think that's another piece of it. I think the upfront planning is really important. And when I say that, I mean upfront planning in the exact use case that's going to bring you value. So my favorite way to go about that is kind of brainstorming where a use case might be most feasible. And by feasible, I mean where you have the data and where you have people that have the appetite to try something. So if you have multiple facilities, which facility is most likely to take on a technology to kind of learn about it and be the, example for others. And then they have the data, they have the resources. And then I also like to brainstorm based on the impact and the business value. And so based on those two scores, kind of ranking the use cases, and whichever one has the biggest business impact and is the most feasible, that's where I recommend starting out, and then scaling should it, provide value.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. We're getting a lot of good comments and questions here and actually humorous ones too, which I always appreciate. Speaking of humorous comments, this is from Will Quinn on LinkedIn. Says, "Wait, leaders didn't consult with frontline employees before deploying a new tool? What? I've never heard that happen either. So I'm shocked, just as shocked as Will is to hear that. But kidding aside, that is a very real issue, obviously, with a lot of manufacturers. Here's a comment. I want to pull this up. This is getting a little, I'll forewarn you, Kate, this is getting a little outside the scope of anything that I can answer. This is way over my head because we're getting into literature and stuff here, and that's not my thing. But this is from Sam Graham on LinkedIn. Says, in the 19th century, Charles Babbage, he corrected it on his next comment. He said it's actually Charles Babbage developed a mechanical computer that almost worked. He reported being asked, "Pray, Mr. Babbage, if you put into the machine wrong figures, will the right answer come out? Is there a danger of AI generating a similar question?" So in other words, if the data is bad, is that going to create problems for AI?
Yeah. Yes. That's why I call it like a data pipeline, especially if you're getting data from various sources. You need to put a lot of time and effort into that data pipeline to extract the data and contextualize it. And you need to have somebody that owns the data integrity. An example that I'm going to be stealing from one of my Industry 4.0 club team members is in her facility, for some reason, the Fahrenheit temperature data changed to Celsius all of a sudden. Totally obviously changed everything that they were getting from their AI. And that was where she realized, okay, if we're going to be implementing this stuff, there needs to be somebody who's monitoring this, because, depending on your application, it could cause a lot of problems.
Right. Yeah, totally. And you don't want to assume, well, because it's AI, it must be right, especially if you've got bad data going in there.
Well, we've all seen ChatGPT's, incorrect answers. So
yes, we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the first things I did when I first used ChatGPT was I entered in the prompt. I said, tell me who the leading independent digital transformation consulting firms were, because I was hoping to see Third Stage on there. It did not tell me Third Stage, but what it told me is all these other companies that are not independent. So I was like, that's not true, because those companies are affiliated with software vendors. So that I was a little jaded early on, but I think it's actually getting a lot better. But still, there's still wrong data out there that ChatGPT is drawing from in certain cases, and you just have to be aware and know that you've been disciplined about your data cleanup and your data governance and all that stuff, which has always been important. But I think manufacturers have struggled a lot with that over the years.
And that's another good point of what might be holding manufacturers back, or like the critical challenges, right? Resources. Everybody wants to implement these solutions, but I don't think they understand like the independent resources that need to be responsible for these projects. Because everybody that has the day job in a manufacturing facility, they don't have the time to take on an AI project as well. And often it requires their input, but there needs to be more people who are coming in and helping out versus like people who already have a day job,
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. Here's another comment from Will on LinkedIn. He says, AI really starts to gain traction when you have an industry expert working with the development team to create real life use cases that help their customers gain value. And that's a great point. I think more so than even other technology initiatives, you need IT and business representation. And Kate, you mentioned all the stakeholders that need to be involved too. There's just a lot of collaboration that goes into making these AI initiatives work. Here's a really interesting question that kind of put you on the spot here, Kate. This is from Luis. On LinkedIn, Luis says, what is more critical, people's involvement in the project or integration between systems? Which I feel like they're both important, but do you feel like one is more important than the other?
That's the magic question. I guess, well, okay, the integration one's easier to answer because it depends on the application. That's my, cheating answer, right? But I mean, obviously that's super important. I'd say that when it comes to what's hindering manufacturers from leveraging AI, it's the people, the organization. And I'm not saying people are getting in the way on purpose. I'm saying it's hard to completely change how you operate. It's hard to implement. Like, I didn't like when I got a new CRM or something, and it was one tool and had nothing to do with AI. I just didn't want to use a new system. So implementing technology that's going to like be part of a person's day-to-day and expecting them to use it is such a big challenge. In fact, that's one of the things that Amgen tracks. Of all the tools that they're implementing, they're tracking, utilization and getting input from their employees. And then that's a big consideration that they're making when they're evaluating implementing a technology is, will people use this? And because, if no one's going to use it, then it's kind of not worth, the technology can be great, but if no one's using it, it won't really matter.
Yeah, I agree. Here's an area we haven't really touched yet is, this is from Saif on LinkedIn. He says, can AI help with supply chain management like material planning and production planning in manufacturing? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think that is a really tough space just with the outlier events. But, if you kind of take the outliers out of the equation, it's very beneficial. Getting real-time information from your supply, the further you can go down either upline or downstream, I'd say, I guess, upline if you're trying to plan for your production process itself. If you get better information going in, you're going to know a lot more on how to optimize your production based on that. And then also the demand that's pulling from your facilities. So demand planning is definitely, I think, an opportunity when it comes to supply. And then also quality is another thing in supply. I guess that's really relevant and important, especially like, I don't know, some paper recycling mills, for example, they have suppliers and get a lot of variety in what they're recycling. And those inputs matter a lot in their production and how to kind of tweak what they're doing in order to make the product to spec. So I think that understanding that data going in and collecting data, that's just an example from these suppliers, and knowing what's coming kind of helps set you up for success to optimize your production, according to what's coming in.
Yeah. And that's where so much of the complexity is too. When you get to material planning and production planning, that's where there's a lot of opportunity to take just mass amounts of data and make better use of it, and augment the human tribal knowledge that's probably been running your supply chain and your material management, your MRP and all that stuff for the years past. What about career prospects? When you think about, people's careers in manufacturing and in technology, how do we navigate our careers differently now, knowing that AI is a thing and it's here to stay? Does it change our career approach, or what kind of skills should we be developing? What are your thoughts there?
Well, if you're asking me personally, I did an Ikigai exercise where, have you heard of that?
No.
Practice? Okay. Essentially like 4 Venn diagrams when you're trying to figure out your career. I guess like what you're good at. I'm going to forget all 4 now that I'm on the spot a little bit. What you're good at, what the world needs, what you can make money in, and then what you enjoy doing. So where those converge. And that's kind of how I picked my career. And what I'm getting at is AI was a massive consideration in my choices in my career. Personally, I think that it's here to stay. And the more experience that you can get, hands-on experience with it, especially in more complex applications, I guess the more valuable I think you'll be long term. I guess what I'm getting at is get your hands dirty, like just if you can get access to learning about AI, I think it's a very important skill set to have moving forward in career opportunities. Like it's obviously a massive thing that employers are looking for is people with AI experience. For I know AI has been around forever. Everyone will say that, but when it comes to the recent AI boom, that talent is, still a small pool. So if you can break into that, I think it would be of value as far as, differentiating yourself from other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And you get ahead of the curve. I mean, it's an opportunity to leapfrog other people that are starting their careers or trying to make a change. So the more you can do there, the better.
And it's great. You learn a lot too.
Yeah.
I think that's why I like it so much. It's still so fairly new that you're problem solving all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. And like we've been saying, the common theme we keep coming back to is there's so many different ways you can use AI. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And also data science too. I noticed that it seems like a lot more younger people coming out of university now are focusing on data science, even if they're not wanting to get directly into technology. It seems like that's just a hot trend just from what we're seeing in the market right now, which I think is smart to focus on the data side of things. What about other than AI, in addition to AI, what are some of the other technological considerations or trends or risks? What are you seeing that's really important to manufacturers right now in the ones you've worked with?
Well, you mentioned CrowdStrike, right?
Yeah.
Friday. Okay. That's a big one. So if you are going to be implementing AI in manufacturing, depending on the applications and what risk you might be subject to should your AI stop working or you lose connection, having a multi-cloud approach, I think, is of value. I had 2 experiences with public cloud providers where my customers weren't able to, use their AI in their production and they relied on it. And if operators are, unable to get that information, it throws them off in a way that's definitely not good for manufacturing and production. And then when it comes down to risk, it's like, depending on what you're producing, it's one thing if it's like, I don't know, fidget spinners. I don't know what manufacturing facility makes those. That's just the first thing that came to my mind. But like, who cares if those get, it's not going to harm anyone. But if you're producing something in biotech and you don't have connectivity and you're reliant on it, it's a big risk. So I'd say like reliability, both from the a network connection, and then also cybersecurity these are more general considerations, but I think it's needs to be built into your overall strategy and who you decide to partner with, making sure that you vet them out appropriately and understanding the risk. So if you're going to do like a closed loop control in your production process, know what happens if, it stops working all of a sudden.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you made a good point about the higher risk your product or the higher risk your product is, then obviously the more risk you have with cybersecurity, and AI hallucinations and other issues from other technological issues as well. I know a lot, like with the CrowdStrike thing, a lot of hospitals were impacted. Banks, when you're dealing with people's money, that's always a risk. When you're dealing with people traveling, that's always a risk. So a lot of high profile, high stakes sort of impacts there. So and you mentioned safety and regulatory. You had that whole thread a few minutes ago about the safety and regulatory side of things too. I mean, you really do have to be extra cautious in some of these critical areas when you're deploying any sort of new technology, and recognize those risks, like you said. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to pick between like 3 really good questions here. Not that I have to pick only one, but I'm trying to figure out what order to go in here. Here's a question from Saif on LinkedIn. What are the key points needed to review to evaluate organizations' readiness before opting any AI solution? I suppose this gets back to that foundational piece. We talked about data, things like that. What if you were to what are some of your thoughts there, in addition to what we've already discussed around some of the things that need to be in place or to show that we're ready? You also mentioned, by the way, the executives have to be on board, and the organization has to be committed to AI. That's another thing, or prerequisite. Are there other prerequisites you could think of that we'd want to make sure we have to ensure that we're ready for an AI initiative?
Sure. So when I was in my sales role, and I'll probably still do this internally at Amgen, but I had like a set of questions I'd ask every single manufacturing leader that I was, having a discovery call with, in order to evaluate whether or not I could sell them my product, right? So when I was at the computer vision startup, it was essentially the easiest way for us to integrate into their production was, and the one question they needed to answer was, do they have their data on the cloud? Because if they did, it made it very easy to get that data through like a quick API pull, and then, process it through our platform and provide them the solutions that they might be looking for. So that was for a computer vision application, and you'd be surprised at how many manufacturers weren't willing to put their data on the cloud, or you might not be surprised, but that was a big thing. So that would kind of almost, not to say that it would totally eliminate them from leveraging computer vision, but it would make it a little bit longer of a process, and require more effort into accessing that data. For example, if a manufacturer had their data on-prem, that was always a challenge. And I understand, the reasons behind that, but it makes it a little bit harder to implement AI quickly. And then from like that exact example, but then some of the other questions are about, the personnel. Like, do you have, a facility, or are there people in your organization that are willing to, they have an appetite for this and they want to, be part of this? That buy-in is really important. And if you don't have that buy-in, that's a big block. I'd say that's a big block for AI readiness in general. Then when it comes to like the foundational AI readiness evaluation, I guess what I'd say is, definitely if you're just collecting data on like an Excel sheet, that's going to be a little bit down the road. You need to have hardware that's able to generate the data and collect the data. Connectivity is really important. But I mean, again, it kind of depends on the use case and the application. You don't have to do the whole facility if you just have a hunch that something's going wrong in one aspect. Like sensors, for example. I was talking to one, like somebody at a lube blend plant, and he had a hunch that there was something. I kind of was alluding to this earlier. I'll give you more context though. He was saying that he thought that one of his 8 blending lines, one of them, a pump was going slower, and he really wanted that pump replaced, but upline wouldn't let him get it replaced because he had no way to prove his suspicion. And I was like, well, you can find that out if you just buy pump sensors, and it's not that expensive. So if he were to go get pump sensors and, do a comparison, he could understand that, validate his concern. But the other benefit there is by collecting that data, and corroborating it maybe with data upline, like in lubricants, you're basically, it's a recipe that's very specific and you need it to come out a certain way. Knowing how your equipment is operating is vital, but then also knowing what the ingredients are that are coming through is really important too. So the AI readiness in that equation could be as simple as, a couple sensors and quality data on the front end, and then quality data on the back end. So it doesn't need to be a massive data collection, but if you don't have data being stored somewhere and collecting somewhere, then that would be the hindrance to being able to leverage AI.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and it's huge. I mean, what you just said is huge for a lot of manufacturers. I mean, a lot of them don't have that readiness or those foundational elements in place. So, while we're all excited about AI, we also have to sort of back up at times and say, well, what are the foundational pieces we need before we can really realistically use AI? And I think that's a big challenge for companies today, and it's something that I would think sort of puts them at risk of potentially falling behind the whole AI trend or movement. Is because if you're busy fixing all these foundational pieces, even though you need to, technology's changing, other people are getting ahead. So I mean, the sooner you can get some of these things in place, I think the better.
Yeah. And also, was it Will that said the industry expertise is beneficial? I think that's really true. Like, given that I was able to work with so many manufacturers, and I was able to do this exercise with so many manufacturers in different industries, I got a good handle on use cases and applications where it could be very feasible and provide a lot of value very quickly. So I started to become pretty good at knowing what questions to ask in order to get to that value and feasibility, and then come up with a plan, because obviously my job at the time was to sell technology. So I wanted to make it a big ROI for them. And without that industry expertise and then the experience, seeing successes and failures, I wouldn't know how to get to that ROI as quickly. And that's where I think a lot of the bigger tech companies, well, of course they have expertise. Sometimes they don't have as micro expertise in manufacturing. So the solutions they're proposing don't always have an ROI because they don't really know how to implement it effectively where it might result in one. And I think that's another thing for manufacturers who haven't implemented AI much, is they also don't really know where to start in all cases. Sometimes they do, but it is a challenging experiment and thought exercise. But when you have that planning right up front, it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we sort of summarize a lot of what we've talked about here today, and we've talked a lot about different trends, a lot of foundational things we need to have in place before we can take advantage of AI. We've talked about how we could start to leverage AI on a small use case basis. So we talked about a lot of stuff. And again, coming back to the whole thread we've been circling around, which is this is complicated stuff. It can be overwhelming. There's a lot of options, a lot of choices, a lot of directions we can go with AI. If we sort of back up and you were going to give us sort of a high level roadmap, how should a manufacturer just get started to navigate some of these different opportunities and challenges that we're talking about?
So start with the business need first and foremost. That's the other thing. Depending on the role, right, I'll ask, what is your goal in your role? So if it's somebody in operations, it's probably throughput or yield, or if you're in paper, it's reducing variance or variability. So I start with that, and then I'm like, okay, well, why? And tying it to the business value. Well, what if you were able to increase throughput by a percentage? What would that mean financially? So then we know the goal and what you're trying to do. And then it's okay, well, tell me about your production process and what is holding you back from, improving your production by 1%. And then you get more information there. Then, okay, well, do you have data? Are you collecting data? Do you have the hardware, the sensors that are producing the data? Okay, great. So then let's go ahead and implement it. And if it works and you get business value that you thought you would, if we reach this goal of increasing throughput by a percentage, and it brings you that value, you can justify then scaling it across your production lines, or if you have more than one facility. So the roadmap is start with the business, like whatever your goals are in your business organization at a very high level, even if it's as generic as, increasing your throughput, safety, whatever. Then from there, well, where could it actually fit in an application where we can just try it out and get value? Because that's what's going to justify the long-term commitment to that technology. And it's one of those things that can help you like fail fast or succeed fast. And basically, so if you start with the business value, you create a good team that's willing to go execute. And it starts also too with the leadership. You have to also reward this behavior, incentivize, and then also showcase the successes. everybody wants to be part of, a positive project. And if you show off the facility that's successfully implemented something, it creates more buy-in from peers and it can spread. So business value, specific use case, start small even and then scale if it works. And then from a roadmap of like implementing new, like your foundational technologies, if you have more than one facility, just start with one and see what works. And then, scale it that way. But if you have one and you're not very digitally advanced yet, I guess I'd say prioritize investing in that hardware, and that if you're going to get a historian, that takes a little bit of time, but that would be the foundational pieces that you need to kind of start with.
Yeah. And you may not have the whole long-term roadmap figured out, and you may not know enough to be able to say, here's our 3 to 5 year AI and technology roadmap, but you could start, like you said, on a smaller scale and at least have some sort of deliberate plan of how you're going to get started. And then as you learn and innovate and scale, then, obviously you can pivot and adjust as you need to, as you keep going.
Well, what I say about the people that have a 5-year roadmap is it's never, it's rare that they stick to that 5-year roadmap.
Yeah.
But also, measuring, like the people part of it too, understanding, is it being utilized long-term? And I think that's the important thing to know. Just as AI is evolving and changing rapidly, I think our approaches to it need to be the same, and our attitudes towards it needs to be the same if we're going to actually get a lot of value. The manufacturers that do the best job are like the lighthouse facility manufacturers. And I'd say that that's what they're really good at. They just go for it and they do it. I don't get held back by overthinking and wanting to do the massive scope. Picking specific spots where you can implement it and get value. That's where you're going to make change.
Yeah. Makes total sense. Well, good. Well, I appreciate you being here today. This was really helpful stuff, and fascinating topic, and good to hear your background. And you have a pretty unique perspective coming from a couple different angles. So really appreciate you being here today, Kate. How can people get a hold of you? Do they follow you on LinkedIn? What's the best way to connect with you if they want to stay connected?
Yeah, please, on LinkedIn. That'd be great. I love meeting new people and learning from y'all too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And thank you to the audience here for being here too. Really appreciate everyone's involvement. Great questions. There were some awesome questions and commentary here today, and humor even. So thank you for that here today. Again, we'll tidy this up. We'll edit this video. We'll add some content to it. We'll make it part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast episode that'll come out here in a few weeks. So stay tuned for that. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see current and past episodes of that show. So be sure to check that out. And then you can also find us here every Tuesday, same time, same place, doing this. And actually, before I let you go, Kate, I was actually thinking this, and Ghassan is sort of validating this, and this is just more of a logistical thing. We'll tag you in LinkedIn. I had trouble finding you too, or I think there's something about, because I think you go by is it Catherine Arndt or something? So there's a lot of Catherine Arndt, so you're kind of hard to find, I thought.
I'll check my LinkedIn settings and make sure that I didn't accidentally make it so people couldn't find me. I'll check those.
Yeah, and
we'll tag her. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. If it was that way, thank you.
Yeah, if you go to this LinkedIn, my LinkedIn page where this is streaming, I've tagged her in that, so you can, if you're watching this on my LinkedIn, my personal LinkedIn, she's tagged in there already. I don't think she's tagged like in the third stage one or on YouTube or anything, but check it out there. And so thank you for that, and appreciate everyone being here today. We'll see you next week, and hope you all have a great week in the meantime. Take care.